help us hit our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support drives us to create even more wonderful stories. Thanks for being part of our journey. In this video, I followed my wife to a motel at 3 a.m., but when I saw who was in the room with her, my world fell apart. It was 2:46 a.m. when Jake's iPad buzzed to life on the kitchen counter, lighting up the dark room with a soft glow. He wasn't supposed to be home. His overnight paramedic shift had been cut short because of a low call volume, still wearing his uniform and smelling like antiseptic and adrenaline. Jake poured himself a glass of water and casually glanced at the screen. It was the Find My app. His wife Lauren's location had updated automatically. It showed her parked on the edge of town at a place called the Oakview Motel. Jake blinked. She told him she was staying over at her best friend Dana's house after a wine night that had never raised red flags before. Dana lived 20 minutes away and Lauren often stayed there to avoid driving tipsy. But this wasn't Dana's street. This was a 2-star motel on a dimly lit roadside. The kind that rents by the hour, not the night. Jake's stomach dropped. He stared at the screen, heart pounding louder with each second. The last updated timestamp showed it had refreshed less than 5 minutes ago. He stood frozen in the kitchen, the cold glass of water still in his hand, trembling slightly. For a moment, he tried to rationalize. Maybe she got the address wrong? Maybe she was helping a friend? Then he remembered the red lipstick. Just before she left earlier that night, Lauren had stood by the mirror longer than usual. She had put on her old crimson shade, the one she hadn't worn in months. She never wore it to Dana's. In fact, she never wore it unless she was trying to impress someone. Jake set the glass down. His pulse raced as he grabbed his phone, wallet, and keys. He opened the garage door silently and slid into his truck, breathing through the storm of thoughts in his head. Something was wrong, and deep down, Jake knew this wasn't just some misunderstanding. Something inside him had already cracked. As he backed out of the driveway, tires crunching over gravel, the GPS recentered. Lauren was still at the motel, and Jake was about to find out exactly why. Coming up next, she wasn't alone in that room, but who was she really with? Up next, Jake's truck rolled to a stop across the street from the Oakview Motel. His headlights off, the engine idling low, the neon vacancy sign flickered above the front office, casting a ghostly red glow over the cracked parking lot. Rain had started to fall, a soft drizzle that beaded on his windshield and masked the silence in his chest. He stared at the app again. Lauren's dot hadn't moved, still in the same spot, room 214. He didn't even know why he clicked into the details, but something told him to. There was a small thumbnail image of the motel pulled from an old online review, and Jake's eyes narrowed. A silver sedan was parked in that photo, the same one that now sat outside room 214. Lauren's car. Jake pulled his hood up and crossed the road slowly, every step echoing in his ears louder than it should have. He walked past the manager's office and toward the row of rooms along the back. Each door looked the same. Faded green, brass numbers screwed in unevenly. His boots made barely a sound on the wet concrete, but his heart felt deafening. When he reached room 214, he stood still. Light peeked from the narrow space under the door. A TV was on inside, voices muffled. He leaned in slightly, holding his breath, and that's when he heard it. A laugh. Her laugh. Lauren's voice, barely muted by the walls, flirtatious and playful. The way she used to sound when they first dated. Jake's throat tightened. Another voice joined hers. A man's, low, confident, too close. He stepped back. His hands were shaking now, his mind racing with possibilities. Was it someone she worked with? A friend? A stranger? Jake turned his face away from the door, trying to gather himself. But that's when something made him freeze. A shadow moved behind the blinds. 2 silhouettes. One of them reached up and turned off the lamp. Then, silence. Just the hum of the motel sign and the storm. Jake took one step back and felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. It was a message from Lauren. "Good night, babe. Love you." He stared at it in disbelief. She was inside that room, and she was still lying to his face. Coming up next, Jake's plan takes a shocking turn, and someone unexpected opens that motel door. Up next, Jake stood frozen in the shadows as the motel door creaked open. his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Lauren who stepped out, but a man, tall, broad shoulders, wearing a pressed dress shirt, half untucked, and fixing his belt with one hand. Jake's pulse surged. The man glanced around casually, then lit a cigarette. His face briefly lit by the flame, and Jake's blood ran cold. He knew that face. It was Ryan, Jake's best friend since high school. They'd been groomsmen at each other's weddings. Jake ducked behind a parked car, heart pounding so hard he thought it might echo. The betrayal twisted deeper than he ever imagined. Not just his wife, but his brother in all but blood. Ryan took a drag from the cigarette, then turned back to the door. He knocked gently, like a lover would. The door opened again, and Lauren's hand pulled him back inside. Jake sank to the curb, his hands gripping the edge of the sidewalk. The rain had stopped, but inside him, a storm was just beginning. All the memories, barbecues, road trips, Sunday football, flashed through his mind like knives. Had it been going on for weeks, months, years? Had every joke between them hidden this lie? He reached for his phone. He could storm in, confront them both, call the cops, record everything, but then he paused. What if he didn't act right away? What if he watched just a little longer? What if he let them dig their own grave, deeper? Jake's face hardened. He wasn't going to just catch them. He was going to destroy them. Don't miss what happens next. When Jake makes a silent vow, and the trap begins to close. Up next. Jake sat alone in his truck, the motel lights still flickering behind him like an omen. He replayed the image of Lauren pulling Ryan into that room, again and again. But the rage was no longer boiling. Now it was cold, focused. He opened the Notes app on his phone and started typing. Dates, times, suspicions. Then he clicked the record button and whispered everything he saw tonight. He needed documentation. He wasn't just catching cheaters. He was building a case. The next morning, Lauren greeted him at the breakfast table like nothing happened. She kissed him on the cheek and asked if he wanted scrambled or fried. Jake forced a smile, masking the weight behind his eyes. He watched her pour coffee. How long had she been pretending? Had Ryan been in their house while Jake was gone? Was Emma ever in the room next door while they whispered and laughed in secret? Jake decided to test her. He casually mentioned that he might be out of town next Friday night for work. She hesitated just a split second too long before replying. Okay, honey. I'll probably just have a girls' night with Melissa. Melissa. Jake knew Melissa was out of town all month visiting family in Michigan. So that was it. Lauren had her alibi ready. She was planning another night with Ryan. He waited until Lauren left for her Pilates class. Then he went upstairs, opened her closet, and searched for her old laptop. The one she thought he'd forgotten about. It took him 30 seconds to crack the password. When he opened her email, his stomach flipped. There they were. Dozens of messages between her and Ryan. Some flirty, some graphic, and some heartbreaking. Last night was perfect. I wish it could always be us. You make me feel like myself again. And worst of all, I don't think Jake suspects a thing. Jake closed the laptop with shaking hands. He knew what he had to do next, but he wasn't going to scream. He wasn't going to cry. He was going to plan. Because when someone betrays you that deeply, you don't just react. You make damn sure they'll never forget what they did. What happens when Jake decides to bait them into one final trap? Coming up next. Jake spent the next 3 days moving with quiet precision. He set up a hidden camera in the guest room closet, synced it to his phone, and tested the audio range. He even replaced the front door lock with a smart model, one that logs every entry and exit. He didn't confront Lauren. He didn't need to. He just watched and waited. On Thursday night, she came home late, claiming her yoga class had run long and she had stopped for drinks with the girls. Jake smiled and asked if she had fun. She lied straight to his face, not knowing he had already checked the smart lock. She hadn't come home until 12:47 a.m. And there were no yoga mats in the trunk when he peeked. Jake printed out 2 photos from the security cam. One of Lauren kissing Ryan in the driveway, and the other of her slipping cash to a front desk clerk at the Sunridge Motel. He folded the images and placed them in a plain envelope. He didn't write anything on it, just set it gently on her pillow. Friday arrived. Jake told Lauren he was heading out for his work trip, and would be back late Saturday. He kissed her forehead, said he loved her, and left without another word, but he didn't go far. He booked a room at the very same motel, 2 doors down from the room Lauren had visited before, and this time he came with a new phone, a hidden mic, and a plan that would change everything. As dusk fell, Jake saw her silver SUV pull into the parking lot. She stepped out, in the red dress he bought her for their anniversary, and right behind her, Ryan. Jake's jaw clenched. They walked past his room. Laughing, he waited exactly 10 minutes, and then knocked on their door. Inside, chaos erupted. Ryan opened the door shirtless. Lauren screamed. Jake didn't say a word. He dropped the envelope on the motel bed and walked away. But what happened next wasn't part of the plan. Ryan chased after Jake in the parking lot, yelling, shoving him in the chest. Jake stayed calm, until Ryan made one fatal mistake. He laughed. Jake lunged. The motel clerk called the cops. Sirens wailed. Lauren screamed. And as Jake was being cuffed in the parking lot, he saw her running back inside with Ryan. But the twist? The footage from Jake's camera was already uploaded to the cloud, and it wasn't just sent to his email. It was sent to Emma's godmother, Lauren's sister, and Jake's divorce attorney. What Lauren doesn't know is, the worst is yet to come. Keep watching. It all unravels in the next chapter. The fallout from the motel confrontation didn't happen immediately. For the next 2 days, Lauren acted like nothing had happened. Jake, back at home and out on bail, said nothing either. But the silence between them wasn't peace. It was a storm gathering. She didn't know who had seen the motel footage. She didn't even ask. She assumed Jake was too broken to fight back. But he was only getting started. Jake contacted Emma's school and removed Lauren from all emergency contacts. He froze their joint account and moved his paycheck to a private one. He consulted a divorce lawyer, who asked just one question after watching the motel footage. Do you want custody, or do you want to ruin her first? Jake chose both. The video of Ryan and Lauren, time-stamped and tagged with location metadata, was shared with Ryan's fiancée, Claire. Claire worked for the city council. Claire was 3 months pregnant. Claire also had a brother who worked at Lauren's yoga studio's parent company. One message from Claire, and Lauren's job vanished. They called it a staffing restructure. Lauren came home that evening pale and trembling, claiming it was unfair. Jake only nodded. That night, Lauren finally broke down. Tears, shaking hands, denial, then rage. She begged for forgiveness. Jake stared at her like she was a stranger. Then he handed her a folder. Inside were 2 copies of a proposed custody agreement. One with joint custody if she left quietly, the other with full custody for him, and a public trial. Lauren collapsed on the couch. The shock of losing everything finally hit her, but Jake still hadn't told her the one thing that would destroy her completely. Not yet, and when she finds out, she'll wish it had ended in that motel room. You won't believe what Jake still has up his sleeve. Keep watching. In the next chapter, Jake knew he couldn't just move on without making Lauren face what she'd truly destroyed. She hadn't just cheated on him. She'd detonated the foundation of their lives and expected him to sweep up the pieces. But Jake had stopped being the cleanup crew. Now he was the architect of consequences. While Lauren sulked around the house, making half-hearted attempts at reconciliation, Jake made one last move. He printed and compiled every message, every photo, every timeline of her lies into a neat, black envelope. Then he wrote one line on the front of it. Read this before you look Emma in the eyes again. Jake invited Lauren to the park where they first met, acting calm, distant. She thought it was a peace offering. She even brought flowers. They sat at the same bench where he'd once proposed to her. Jake handed her the envelope. She opened it, confused, and the color drained from her face as the truth unfolded line by line. Her affair wasn't just a betrayal. It was chronic, calculated, and intertwined with Emma's daycare teacher, whom she once asked to lie for her. Lauren stammered, eyes wide, whispering, "You were never supposed to know that part?" Jake looked at her like a stranger and replied, "That's the part that made me decide." He stood up and walked away without another word. Lauren, frozen in the seat, clutched the pages with shaking fingers as her entire image of control collapsed. But Jake wasn't going home, because while she had destroyed their marriage, Jake had just destroyed her reputation in one final, calculated move she never saw coming. What did Jake do behind the scenes that Lauren still doesn't know? Keep watching in the next chapter. Lauren sat on the couch, flipping through the envelope Jake had handed her, trying to catch her breath as the weight of her own lies came crashing down. But what she didn't know, what made Jake so calm, so final when he walked away, was that he hadn't just left her emotionally, he'd already filed for divorce, and he wasn't done. 2 days before handing her the envelope, Jake had met with an attorney and presented every detail of her affair, including the evidence that tied it to someone from their daughter Emma's school. That wasn't just a betrayal. It was a threat to Emma's stability, and the court would see it that way. Jake's lawyer had already drafted a full custody request. Lauren would be served by the end of the week, but there was something else Lauren hadn't discovered yet. The daycare teacher Lauren involved, Heather, was also furious. She didn't know Lauren had dragged her name into lies to cover an affair. When Jake contacted Heather and revealed the full extent, she didn't hesitate to write a formal statement in Jake's favor. Jake, once silent and unsure, was now 4 steps ahead. He wasn't just walking away. He was taking everything Lauren had taken for granted. As Lauren sat alone, trying to call him, Jake's phone buzzed once, and he let it go to voicemail, because now he was the one with power, and soon she would understand what real loss felt like. But what happens when Lauren finds out who else was helping Jake behind the scenes? You'll find out in the next chapter. Lauren couldn't sleep, not because of the divorce papers, not because she might lose custody of Emma, but because Jake wasn't acting like Jake anymore, and that terrified her more than anything. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't crying, he was calculating. She lay awake replaying every moment from the past week. And then she remembered something that jolted her upright. She had left her old iPhone in the attic, one she hadn't used since the early days of the affair. Jake didn't know about it, or at least she thought he didn't. She rushed to the attic, digging through boxes, clawing through insulation until she found it. Dusty, but still intact. When she powered it on, her heart dropped. The passcode had been changed. Her stomach twisted as the screen lit up with a message. Thanks for leaving the evidence behind. It helped more than you know. Jake had found it already. The next morning, Lauren arrived at her lawyer's office frantic, demanding a new strategy. But it was already too late. Jake had used that phone to uncover not just her affair, but months of audio messages, screenshots, and even a burner banking app she used to pay for motel rooms. The entire case had flipped, but what shattered her completely wasn't the legal damage. It was the realization that Jake had known for much, much longer than he ever let on. And every kind moment he gave her in the last 2 months, it wasn't love, it was leverage. But the final blow hasn't landed yet. And it comes from someone Lauren never saw coming. Find out who in the next chapter. Lauren sat in the courtroom, her palms sweaty, her eyes hollow. Everything Jake had meticulously gathered, the burner banking records, the motel security footage, the recovered audio messages, had already devastated her credibility. She had come into the trial expecting to lie, charm, and twist her way out like she always had. But this time, none of that worked. This time, Jake was 1 step ahead, and now he was standing to give his final statement. Jake didn't look at her once. He looked at the judge, at the gallery, and then down at Emma, who sat quietly beside his sister, Julie. Jake explained that Lauren's affair wasn't just a betrayal of their marriage, it was a betrayal of their child. While Lauren had been sneaking off to motels, he had been the one packing lunches, bandaging scraped knees, and wiping away tears. He didn't raise his voice, but every word landed like a punch to the ribs. The judge was moved. Lauren's attorney looked defeated. It was over, or so she thought. As the court recessed, Lauren rushed outside for air, overwhelmed and humiliated. And that's when she saw him, not Jake, not the man she had been cheating with, but her father. She hadn't seen him in years. He had walked out on her family when she was just 8. Now he was here in a suit, standing next to Jake. "What is he doing here?" she hissed. Jake stepped forward slowly, cold and calm. "You told me he was dead," Jake said. "But I found him, And now he knows exactly what kind of daughter he left behind. Lauren's knees buckled, not from shame, but because her father, the man she had told everyone was abusive, had just handed Jake a sworn statement, a statement that contradicted everything she had used to justify her behavior over the years, her entire story, her persona, her excuses. Shattered, Jake didn't want revenge. He wanted truth, and in front of the entire courtroom, he had turned her lies inside out. Now, with custody granted solely to Jake and her name destroyed in court and media, Lauren realized this wasn't just a loss, this was checkmate. Would you have done what Jake did? Or would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments.